Central Florida today with respect to these issues. And I'm going to start with Mayor Dyer, and you have 3 minutes.
Where are we right now? Wow, okay. I think we're in a transformational stage. Our community is one of 3 communities of our size in the entire country that has no form of commuter passenger rail or high-speed rail, and we're about to go from 0 to 60 in terms of being rail central. 61 miles of commuter rail running from DeLand to Barry, Maitland, yes, Winter Park too. Ironic that you would study Winter Park. I stole that from Commissioner Segal. And then to be the first true high-speed rail project in the country, running from Orlando to Tampa. People will be visiting. We're going to be a medical destination, a tourism destination, and a rail destination for everybody that wants to see how to do it right. And there are enormous benefits to our community. Having a sustainable community means that we have to grow in a different manner than we have for the last 100 years. And the myregion.org organization, which has led us for the last, I guess, 8 to 10 years in thinking about how are we going to grow, helped us identify and put together all the regional leaders behind the idea that we have to have transit and grow in a more dense urban manner, and commuter rail is absolutely a necessity if we're going to do that. Then you add on top of that all the great stuff, the environmental stuff, the jobs. I think everybody's interested in jobs right now, so to think about being under construction, probably by the end of the year with commuter rail and the thousands of construction jobs and then development related jobs that'll come after that, and the same thing for high-speed rail, the impacts are simply enormous.
Commissioner Segal, I'd like you to address the same thing. Maybe talk a little bit, I know economic development, you mentioned it, Mayor, is a critical issue. From the larger perspective of the county, sort of where do we stand, what are the, what's the situation, and maybe talk a little bit about the economic development.
Sure, thank you very much, and thanks to ULI and UCF. This is a great assemblage this morning, and the fire marshal is on his way. Mayor Dyer hit it pretty well as far as the center city goes, and a lot of people, as I go out to Wedgefield or Winter Garden, often wonder what you're saying, what will it do for them? And I think it's the start of a system. You have to start somewhere. Been here all my life. I think rail is as defining as Disney, the coming of UCF and the medical city. I think it's going to define the way we live, and it's the beginning of a system. And I think, I saw Craig Usler out here. The market will validate this form of transportation. I have 2 boys, 25 and 27. They don't want to live in the burbs. They want to live in a more urban lifestyle. They want to take advantage of the things that an urban lifestyle will give us. The creative class, I think, depends on more urbanization. So I think it will define the way we live and the way we work for many years to come. And I think later on we're going to get on to how this system will expand. Linda and others will talk about that. Thank you.
All right, great. Harry, same sort of general issue, but really honing in on transportation, land use. Because in the end, the transit system's there to support the desired lifestyle. And
right.
How is that? Where do we stand on that? What are the what are the issues in terms of the integration of the system with the ongoing land use plans?
Thanks, James. Whoever would have thought we'd have not just 1 rail project, but 2 rail projects moving ahead simultaneously? Wow. Someone had mentioned a while ago when I was talking about that it's really the equivalent of winning the lottery. And I took issue with that. Winning the lottery is pretty much luck. I look around this room, and all of you had been part of the crusade to bring this about. There was no luck associated with this. It took an enormous amount of work over many, many years to get us to where we are today. And it was really an extraordinary effort. And I've got to credit Mayor Dyer with being our team captain for the past few years, who's really done an extraordinary job carrying the ball down the field with a good full cast of supporters to make this happen. But what an extraordinary accomplishment. As you step back a little from the exciting time where we are, I think it also calls attention to the challenge of bringing about change. Think of all that it took to bring about change. And it's not over yet. The crusade needs to continue to bring about the kind of change I think most people here would like to see in our future. A little perspective also on where we find ourselves today, James. Todd, I think, will be speaking about the challenges of the project, the Sunrail project, not to be underestimated. A lot of work to really deliver on that. I remember after the Success Mayor in Tallahassee in December, a number of people said, boy, that's done. Well, it was a big hurdle, and we all celebrated, but not exactly done. A lot of work to be done to make it a reality. But among the things facing us now, where we are today, we had previewed with our board 2 weeks ago a program that we're launching called Connections 2013. In 2013 happens to be the opening of the first phase of Sunrail. And beyond the actual construction of the project, there is an enormous amount to be done to ensure its success. It's what we call Connections 2013, Optimizing Rail Investments in Central Florida. 16 components, all of which are important to be sure the project really returns on the investment that we're making. That has to do with transportation connections, and I think we'll be talking a little more about that in the course of today's program. But James, it also has to do with the land use piece as well. We really have to bring land use patterns around to complement the investments that have been made in transit. And that's going to take a very conscious effort on the part of the entire region, including ULI members and many of you in this room today. So we've all got a role to play in that.
Thank you. We will undoubtedly touch on all of those subjects again as we move forward. Todd, you and I talked a little bit earlier. I'm sitting over in Tampa, and we have exactly the same issues you have. Most people are not sure what transit is. They can't tell the distinction between the different modes. You've got two systems that are very different, I'm sure in a lot of people's minds. Well, there was transit, whatever that is. Talk a little bit, particularly about high-speed rail and commuter rail, but maybe even more generally, what is the full range of issues and options out there with respect to transit?
Yeah, like we talked about earlier, is we're on the verge of trying to change from this car culture to this transit culture. And in order to kind of get folks to understand the difference between the two, I try to explain what high-speed rail is, what commuter rail is, to an analogy of what they understand. High-speed rail is a dedicated corridor, and if you want to use a car analogy, it's like the turnpike, but probably even less stops than the turnpike. Very limited access, dedicated corridor. You can travel much higher speeds on it. So, and it's usually between cities, so it's intercity rail on a dedicated corridor. Where commuter rail, for us here in Central Florida, it's kind of a cross between 1792 and I-4. You're going to go a little bit faster than you do on 1792, faster than you do on congested I-4, but it has the same type of stops in between. And the other major difference is the commuter rail service is usually run by a commuter rail agency, a local entity agency to run that thing, whereas the high-speed rail is run by a higher level of agency, more regional, larger regional, state government type thing. Some of the challenges we have going through is, like Harry mentioned, the legislation was a major hurdle, but then after that, then a lot of heavy lifting needs to take place to get that done. As far as Sunrail goes, we're still moving through the environmental process to get clearance to then go ahead and secure our funding from the federal government. So that's been a pretty lengthy process to get through. We're almost there. And then we got to go ahead and procure all the things that go along with it. We have to go ahead and a lot of infrastructure improvements, new wayside signal system, 18 miles of double tracking within the 31 miles of the initial operating segment, procure locomotives, coaches and cab cars, fare collection systems, you name it, as well as a marketing campaign to reach out to the folks, not only to the riders, but also the remaining folks within the region, what's in it for them as well. Even though I'm not riding, how is it going to benefit me? And that's a major part of our campaign as well. High-speed rail, they're moving forward with trying to get that project built by 2015. Obviously, we only got half the money now, but they're moving forward with using that money as much as they can. One of the major things they're doing right now is taking the design from what was about 8% for the initial application up to about 30% to further refine that estimate so we can get a better estimate to the federal government what the remaining money we need to finish the project. They're also working on using portions of that money to do what activities we can do now, i.e. secure that corridor as the dedicated rail corridor. So a lot of, I say maintenance of traffic items, they're going to be putting the barriers up. Working on a contract to put barriers up along the center of I-4 between Orlando and Tampa, so that once we get the go-ahead to build the tracks, there is a secure environment to do the construction and eventually for the corridor itself, as well as working on the request for proposal to go ahead and do that civil work. So that's kind of where we are right now, the difference between the two systems, and where FDOT is working right now to get the two systems up and running.
Great, thank you, Todd. Linda, as probably the person who actually runs a transit system here in here in Central Florida, you talk a little bit about just where you are now. ULI report that came out, there's a staggering amount of ridership. I think people are not aware of how many people use the bus system, but also how will the bus system integrate with these other two systems as they come online?
Thank you, James. I've got one right here, Harry. Yes. Lynx provides 25 million passenger trips every single year. That's over 82,000 trips every single weekday. Imagine 82,000 more cars on I-4 without transit. But having said that, we're still not a mature transit system. We've got a great start, we're making progress, but we do have a lot of work. Like our rail projects, we still have a lot of work on the transit system, on the bus system. Our rail systems cannot be successful unless you have feeder bus routes feeding into the major stations, and we're working very closely. I think we have, it seems daily, but I'm sure it's only weekly meetings with FDOT to make sure that the systems are coordinated. But we do have a tremendous amount of coordination and have made some good progress on making sure that that happens. We are in the process of procuring 16 additional buses just to serve the commuter rail system. We have 22 routes that we are that either directly serve the stations or will be changed slightly to serve the stations. We're moving 3 of our transfer stations out in the suburbs to the rail stations, 3 of the rail stations, to make sure that there is good connectivity there. And another project I want to mention to you that will be a tremendous benefit, and again, it's Mayor Dyer that stepped up to the plate for this project as well, but we're in the process of doing the planning work that needs to be done to expand the limo system downtown. Those of us that work, live, or play downtown will be happy to know that we're looking at expanding from hospital to hospital, Citrus Bowl to Thornton Park, and who knows, eventually we could possibly go to Baldwin Park, to College Park, with a dedicated right-of-way for the limo system, very frequent bus service, very convenient, so you can park your car and get on limo like I did to come to this meeting today, and get anywhere you need to be. And all of the limo routes will be connecting with the downtown commuter rail stations, so that's going to make it very convenient for people coming in from the suburbs or the other communities in the outer ring of Central Florida into downtown. It'll be a really good, strong system there for people to reach their final destination.
Really, this is addressed to the group, but I think maybe Harry and Linda have the first say, maybe Harry in particular. People say, why did Florida get high-speed rail? I mean, what was done so that they said, the president shows up and says, we're going to give you $1.25 billion to build high-speed rail. For a lot of people, that's the first they heard of it. What is sort of the background of that? What were the studies? And I know that the history of commuter rail in this area has been going on for quite a while. Can we talk a little bit about sort of why now we are here talking about these two opportunities?
There was a tremendous amount of work leading up to this. Now, I adopted Central Florida as my home in 1996, and I see Bill Donegan is here. Bill served on the Metro Plan Orlando board during the recruitment process. And boy, those 14 years have passed quickly, and I hope you don't regret your decision in bringing me here. Thank you. But this has been on the back burner for a long time. I think the thing that really got us to the point where we were this year with the President's Award really goes back to the 2000 elections in Florida. I think I've got my dates correct. You may remember, I talked about the crusade before. A fellow by the name of Doc Dockery decided that this process in Florida was so sluggish about bringing about change that we needed a constitutional amendment to bring high-speed rail to the state of Florida. Now, many of you may have had some philosophical issues with that. Does stuff like that belong in the Constitution? But he was so frustrated, he spent several $1,000,000 of his personal wealth to get that on the ballot. And Florida voters said, yeah, this is something we need for our future. And because it got into the Constitution, a lot of good work got underway doing all the preliminary studies to actually look at the feasibility of it, develop a lot of the preliminary plans. And then some folks didn't like the fact that it was in the Constitution. So in 2004, it came back to Florida voters. And if you wanted high-speed rail, you had to say no. Some of you may remember that. It was a little confusing at the ballot box. But it got removed from the Constitution. Nevertheless, a lot of good work had been done. And some of it sputtered along without full support by all, but some of it did continue. But it was Doc Dockery's initial investment, some very, very good leadership of something called the Florida High-Speed Rail Commission, most recently chaired by a prominent member of our community here, Lee Shira, who had continued that work, even with some political opposition in Tallahassee, continued doing that work. So when suddenly there was the opportunity, when this became a federal priority, first actually in the, just before President Bush left office, with the help of Congressman Mica and Congresswoman Brown, a federal bill was passed reinvigorating the high-speed rail system, high-speed rail concept in the country. But more recently, with President Obama, Florida was poised and ready to go and ahead of the pack because so much of this work had been done already, against some extraordinary odds and against a lot of false starts in the history of the state of Florida. But it was because of that good planning that had been done that really positioned us further than any other state in the country to now deliver what will be the first high-speed rail project, new high-speed rail project in the nation. So it was a credit to good planning, visionary thinking, and I think persistence on the part of many people knowing this eventually would need to happen.
Great, thank you.
James, if I can also add, it's the old saying, location, location, location. Everybody loves Florida. The reason we're all here, we have a fabulous climate. We have a lot of people from the Northeast corridor who like to come visit and live in this area. Another reason we're all here. And if you look at the map and think about the strategic location of the state and the other rail corridors that are being developed along this northeastern seaboard, it's a perfect connection with the upper part of this country and a tremendous opportunity to have a kind of connection that we've never had before on the ground. So I think location is absolutely crucial for being able to link us with all the other communities and states along the eastern seaboard.
Thank you. This fellow in Tampa named Ed Turanchik, many of you are familiar with him. He was our leader, our fearless leader as we went after the Olympics back in 1999 and 2000. But Ed is basically saying to folks in our part of the state, the eyes of not just the country, but probably the world are on Florida. And this is our opportunity to really do it right. And that's, again, like every opportunity, the flip side of that is there's a little bit of pressure on that to try to do it right. Todd, maybe Mayor, Tampa has one station. The Central Florida area has 3 stations. How were the decisions made to put the 3 high-speed rail stations where they were?
A lot of planning was done by the High-Speed Rail Commission that Lee Shira chaired in the past, and one of the reasons, as was mentioned, that we were towards the front of the pack is the environmental work was done, the right-of-way acquisition was largely done. We have $1 billion almost already into high-speed rail before we even get started. So the High-Speed Rail Commission is really the one that did a lot of the planning on where the stations are going to be. And the current plan on stations are starting at the Orlando International Airport is Grand Central Station, and I wish we had a slide on what that's going to look like. I don't know if you.
No, we just have maps. We just
okay,
have
just
maps.
but
You're right, it's a very impressive.
It's very impressive, visionary. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. The second stop will be at iDrive, so there'll be a stop in the tourist corridor. The third stop will be at somewhere on Disney property, yet to be determined. They're working on that. Another stop in Polk County, and there's 2 candidates for that, one closer to Lakeland and one closer to the University of South Florida campus that they're going to locate. And there's some discussion in Polk County about which of those options is actually going to occur. And then the last is in Ybor City in Tampa. So you can get from the Orlando International Airport to Tampa in 56 minutes. So that's a better trip than driving for sure. And you know you're going to be there in 56 minutes. Right now, if you drive that, it could be an hour and 10 minutes, or it could be 2 hours and 10 minutes, or sometimes 3 hours and 10 minutes. So it's a good trip. The Grand Central Station at Orlando International Airport, there are some visionary people that have been on that board for years. And if you look at any of the runways out there, they have been able to construct them in a manner that they could accommodate as many as 4 different modes of transit coming into the Orlando International Airport. And there has been a plan to add a second terminal, a south terminal, whenever the capacity of the north terminal was reached. And this is going to enable the airport to move forward with that south terminal. And they're going to build it in a fashion that it will accommodate 4 modes of transit. You could have the ITS, which is the people mover that they currently have, and then light rail, commuter rail, and high-speed rail all coming in on one level. And then if you think about the atrium that's currently in the Hyatt out there, think of that about 3 times the size, and you'd come up out of one mode of transportation into this Grand Central Station and then be able to immediately get back onto another mode of transportation. So it's going to be something that people will come from worldwide to see what we're doing, and you're right about that. We're going to be the first system, first true high-speed system, and we're talking high-speed rail, but there's only 2 systems that are actually going to be 160-mile-an-hour systems, and that's us in California. So we will be the model. The eyes will certainly be on us. The rest of the question is, why isn't it coming to downtown Orlando? Right? Okay, that was where you were headed with that. And I would hope that eventually it does, but some of these things are hard to get done, and if you change the plan too many times, you never get it done. So the plan that we have is the plan that we need to act on and construct, and we want to make our airport the transportation hub of the entire Southeast, and I think this will do it.
So, well, Sunrail stations, and I think Harry mentioned studies, or we've all mentioned studies, and I've been informed that studies began on the Sunrail stations as early as the mid-'70s, and then follow-up studies in the '80s and so on. And all those studies came back with a lot of these same stations that you're seeing today. There were several stations that were added after you then plugged the studies into further ridership models. And also local government input as well as stakeholders input. Church Street Station downtown is one of them, as well as Maitland and Longwood were both original stations that were not identified in those original studies. But the stations here were basically all shown in those studies throughout the years and continue to be the stations that are selected today, and continue to support the ridership that we have built into the model, and in making sure that adding stations doesn't take away from ridership at other stations and et cetera. If you take stations away, it doesn't then congest the other stations. So these are the ones we need to maximize the ridership potential for the type of folks that are going to be riding on this commuter service. And it's generally the commuters, the same type of people that are traveling the same distances, by car, by I-4 and 1792, the same paths, parallel paths to the station that I'll be riding it. And those ridership models and studies look at things such as distance traveled to the stations, modes of connection to the stations and whatnot, to make sure that it's consistent with what the FTA's model for ridership is.
Let me ask you a very, very obvious question. You look at the map here, and the yellow line obviously is the high-speed rail with the blue squares being the station stops there. Red line is Sunrail with the purple stations. The 2 lines cross, but there's nothing happening where they cross. talk a little bit about.
Obviously, the challenges of trying to, and you heard the mayor already talk about the intricacies of the Grand Central Station at the airport, and he talks about multi-levels and things like that. That's what it would take to connect two different systems as diverse as I mentioned earlier there. And there will be connection, and obviously you don't want to add another stop already. High-speed rail is high-speed rail for a reason. It goes high speed, and the more stops you add to that, the less speed that you have. So that's one of the challenges as well as making that connection there. However, we're working on it, and the mayor also mentioned light rail, another commuter rail stop. We're working right now with Lynx on making a rubber tire connection that will be in service the day commuter rail service is up and running with nonstop service from Sand Lake to the airport, every train that stops. So we will have that direct connection as soon as we're up and running via buses. But we don't know. I mean, it's still out there. It's still 2013. We may have some other rail connection by then, or a phase off of commuter rail, or I don't know if light rail will be built that quickly, but there will be a connection, without a doubt, between the rail systems eventually.
Let me just add in that OUC has a coal spur that runs off the current CSX track, which will be Sunrail. It originates in Taft, right off of the Sunrail line, and runs to the power plant. So it runs between the airport property and the medical city. So a natural connection would be to take Sunrail on the CSX line that the city of Orlando already owns. So that's certainly one option, and I know I was with Congressman Micah yesterday, and he's a proponent of that and has talked at least initially about putting that in the reauthorization bill next time around.
Okay, great. There's a lot of good information here. Commissioner Segal, the 1.25 billion from the federal government, but the full cost of the system is somewhere in the $2.5 billion range. How are we going to make up that difference? How are we going to actually pay for the high-speed rail system?
I guess that's the $64,000 question.
A little more than that, I think.
Yeah. And that will be determined by the Congress and the leaders in Washington. So we're just glad that we're in the game, and glad that Sunrail is funded and that is done. So, yet to be determined.
Yet to be determined.
Yeah.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
There's a follow-up question since we're talking about the high-speed rail, and I'm jumping around a little bit on our script. There's some discussions going on here as well as in Tampa. Who starts first? Do we start at the Orlando end? Do we start at the Tampa end? Is this going to be built in phases, the high-speed rail? Can you talk a little bit, to the extent that there's actually knowledge out there at this point, and a lot is still being discussed.
Well, we all know that it's going to start in Orlando, and it's going to start at the airport at Grand Central Station and then head as far west as possible till the money runs out.
That's how they conquered the West, right?
Actually, you're asking the local guys decisions that will be made at the state and federal level. So we're hopeful that it'll be a complete system. We're hopeful that it'll continue to Miami.
Okay. Todd, you
Yeah, I talked with Nazia Dodd, who's the project manager for FDOT on the high-speed rail project this morning. And, like I mentioned earlier, we are working on a milestone type of construction path or project path, so to speak, there. And there is a process that they have in place to try to secure the remaining monies for the rest of the rail, and the idea is to build it all at one time. And they're doing what they can with the monies they have right now with the things that I mentioned, such as taking design further so they can refine those estimates, as well as getting the corridor secured, and also looking at other options for funding, so it's in place, such as public-private partnerships and whatnot, to finish the entire construction of that corridor. And where it physically starts, although we would like it to begin here, the reality is until it goes from one end to the other, you won't have an operating system.
You can't operate half a high-speed rail system. I guess you can get to Lakeland very, very quickly. But clearly, and truth be told, it's not simply the first 60 some odd or 70 miles. Ultimately, there's a vision for the entire state. As was mentioned, it'll connect up to the Northeast. And the goal, big picture, is really a very strong integrated network nationwide. And many of us have actually traveled to Europe. You can get on the different systems there, and you realize how wonderful an interconnected high-speed rail system can be. And then you take the map of Europe and you sort of drop it over the southwest United States, and the whole thing fits in 4 states. And you realize that part of our challenge is we're a big country. Things are very, very spread apart. And you know, the challenge is you have to start somewhere, but this is a long-term proposition. Several of us were up in Boston a couple weeks ago at the ULI spring meeting, and the #1 topic, this is all developers, and back in the fall, the #1 topic was how come there's no money anymore. But the #1 topic at the meeting in Boston was actually infrastructure, with a lot of emphasis on rail, connectivity, and how are we going to, you know, both add to the current system, but also how are we going to compete with China? Okay, how are we going to compete with those Asian countries that are dropping hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars into state-of-the-art systems? In fact, the fastest system, Greg, you can correct me, in the world is in China. 246 miles an hour is the average traveling speed on the system. So it's a maybe the average peak traveling speed, but it's fast. It's very, very fast. And as someone who spends a great deal of time on airplanes and in airports, that would be incredible, let me tell you. To go that fast and have none of the hassles at the end, and then when you get there, you're there. That's really part of the beauty of the system. One of the things, you know, we're going to shift a little bit from the high speed to the commuter rail. TOD, transit-oriented development. There's not a community in the country that isn't talking about it. Although realistically, there's only a number of cities where it's actually beginning to happen in a big way. Somebody talk a little bit about what TOD is. What is transit-oriented development? And then let's hone that in on terms of the commuter rail, because that's the obvious logical nexus. How are we going to do it? You build the system, build the stations, and then what happens? So, Commissioner, Harry, Mayor, somebody just.
Well, Mr. Barley and I just spoke at Rollins to Dr. Fogelslong's class a while ago about transit-oriented development. It is one of the growth tools that we're using in the county and the city. The city of Longwood has a terrific idea. They're going to really redo their city around transit-oriented development. I know Altamont Springs is doing it. It's most interesting because we're talking about Amendment 4, and I know that Longwood and Altamont are both hustling through the plan, through the process, so that they can beat Amendment 4. Oftentimes, people think that Amendment 4 only pertains to the hinterlands. Well, it actually pertains to us redefining the urban areas also. We chuckle about Winter Park. I hope y'all can be at Winter Park Friday at noon as they once again discuss rail. They have a different vision about what they want for transit-oriented development than Maitland just down the street. Maitland wants intensity around the rail stations. Winter Park does not. Orlando and the hospitals are going to be great beneficiaries of this system. Everybody's going to do it a little bit differently, but again, it's the beginning of density. It's the beginning of a new way of building Central Florida.
You know, when we look at the Sunrail stations and the high-speed rail stations, it's a mixed picture. Many places already have the kind of development that you'd like to see. Places like Link Central Station, although opportunities there with that huge parcel, right off Orange Avenue across from the courthouse. Church Street Station, of course, tremendous opportunities there, but much of it built already. But you go to other locations, and it's really a blank canvas. In fact, when we talked to folks, when I was over at Rollins, there were a few students in there that happened to be from Sanford. They grew up in Sanford. And I was talking about the Sanford location, the Sanford Sunrail Station. Born and raised, they didn't know where this was. It's kind of in a completely undeveloped area. And when I say there's a blank canvas, extraordinary opportunities, not just there, but places like Sand Lake Road will be totally transformed in future years because of the transportation investments that are being made. So there's a chance to reinforce some of the sites where there's already the right kind of thing happening. But many places are just ripe for extraordinary things to happen. I'm very proud that our board, in the long-range plan that was approved last summer, it wasn't just a transportation plan, it was also a land use plan. And our board consists primarily of elected officials from throughout the region who get it and understand we need to bring about a different future than we have today. And that was fully with their support on what we called an alternative land use strategy. But let's remember, even though elected officials on our board and good groups like the Regional Planning Council and Links, we can influence the land use planning process, but the responsibility for that really rests with local elected officials back home on county commissions and city councils and private property owners. The market conditions have got to be right to bring about the kind of land use changes that we want to see in the areas of these stations. And again, that's just such a natural fit with optimizing the investments that are made. Some of it, I think, is going to involve some encouragement by all of you who believe in this, elected officials serving on those boards, and there have to be the proper incentives in there for the private sector to step up and take advantage of these opportunities. I think it's a combination of all three.
James, if I can comment about the federal level, I think this is an absolutely key piece of what we need to be thinking about. For the first time, at least that I'm aware of, the DOT, US DOT and HUD are meeting on a monthly basis to talk about distributing federal funds to communities that do land use planning and transit planning together, to integrate those two together. For the first time in a long time, there is going to be federal funding available for not just mixed use at transit stations, but mixed income development, not just the higher levels of housing, but all levels of housing, to truly have a good mix. There's a recent call for projects for federal funding. For the first time that I'm aware of, we have new urbanists at HUD who are very much interested in this kind of development. So if we're ready with projects, we have the plans in place, that money is going to be available and be distributed, and we need to make sure we're there with our projects ready to go to start building around the stations that we're planning right now.
Actually, I think Secretary Cisneros was a supporter of new urbanism, but really more at the project scale, you know, the mixed income, affordable housing. The initiative she's talking about is the Sustainable Communities Initiative, which is at the federal level, and they're just about ready to announce at least the guidelines for how you can go about it. $100 million, I believe, 23 million will be for rural areas, 75 million for more urban areas, 2 million for technical oversight. They expect there will be enormous amounts of competition for these grants. They're basically grants to regions to, exactly as Linda said, show how you can integrate transportation and land use to create sustainable communities. And given that that is really throughout the country, that's what people are talking about, I suspect it'll be one of the most staggeringly successful programs, and hopefully one that they decide to continue on and on into the future. In this Central Florida region, are you talking about integrating transportation and land use? I mean, who's doing that? I know, like every other region, there's dozens of agencies that all have little pieces of the pie, and this is what we're talking about, is really coordination. So how is that taking place? And if it is, how is it taking place now?
We're all talking the same thing. And that change has to be a gradual process. But I don't know anybody that's not talking about that these days. We've reached the point where people understand the importance of it. I think it was all pretty much theoretical until we have actual investments being made on the ground. And that's what makes this such an exciting time. Projects are going to be happening, so it's no longer theory, it's actual practice. And people are moving ahead at a pretty good clip to take advantage of that. We could go right from Volusia County on down to Osceola County, station by station, talking about the kinds of things that are happening or the kinds of things that are being discussed. Todd mentioned, I only called out a couple of sites, but Todd mentioned a great example. I mentioned Church Street Station and Link Central Station, but one that you see coming out of the ground already is Florida Hospital. I mean, exciting things happening there today. But there'll be even more happening to the west of Florida Hospital over to I-4. They're building a complete campus there that, as Linda mentioned, will include housing as well. Not exclusively maybe for their employees, but that's the idea behind it. Orlando Health, a lot of exciting things happening there, tied into the station. So we've got some very, very good examples, but we need to keep that process moving, and we need to keep encouraging that type of change. I think it's going to get a huge boost once we actually have trains rolling. That's what really calls attention to things. People see the opportunities. People are moved to act.
Just to comment on 2 points. This federal administration is really the first urban administration that we have had probably in a generation. They understand cities, they understand urban densities, they are new urbanists from the president on down. I didn't realize I was a new urbanist till somebody explained the term to me right after I was elected mayor, but in fact I am a new urbanist. And one of the prime examples of potential transit-oriented development. Anybody remember where the old arena is? The one where the Magic are going to win their NBA championship in the next few weeks? That will be obsolete in October and will eventually be demolished, and we're going to redevelop that entire 60 acres that the city owns, and it's already anchored by UCF's School of Emerging Media and the House of Moves, which is the most sophisticated motion capture studio east of the Mississippi River. And we want to create something we're calling the Creative Village, which will be a bohemian type of area within our city that is based on the digital media industry and the type of people that work in that industry. It'd be a live, work, and play area. But we think we're going to be able to partner with a developer and bring down some of that federal money because we're going to be a transit-oriented development, because we're walking distance from Link Central Station, and it is exactly what the Secretary of Transportation has been talking about in terms of transforming a community into a walkable, sustainable place. So that could end up being not only having high-speed rail and commuter rail, but maybe the model transit-oriented development project in the entire country.
Yeah, we had done TOD workshops that DOT had kind of hosted back in 2007, and it may be time to look at those again. And now that Dr. Moore's got it in his hand, is to do that again. And you're right, Harry, when trains are rolling. But I think as soon as you see ground broken on this thing, then it becomes a reality, folks. Because there's probably still folks out there still questioning, is this going to happen? We all in this room are comfortable it's going to happen, but it's still they start physically see things, tracks being laid, new signal systems, that kind of thing. Then the folks that are already in are going to start coming, and you're going to see people even coming out of the work even further. How do I get in there? So, it definitely is the time to restart that stuff again.
And since this is ULI and we dote over the medical city, I want to say something on behalf. The mayor didn't cover, but as Harry said, we have 2 stations at the hospitals, and the city of Orlando is anchored by 2 great medical facilities. Each one of them has a long-term plan, and each one of them is based on transit, based on Sunrail.
Great. Let me drive down a little bit further on the TOD issue. Sometimes you can build the train, and 15 years later, there's a surface parking lot sitting there. And even though you think, there are examples, Greg and I were talking last night, Bay Area Rapid Transit System in the Bay Area, San Francisco. Long Island Railroad, most of the station stops are surrounded by surface parking, and this is one of the densest environments in the community. Is there a way we can ensure that when we build it, they're ready to come? Because this is partly, it's a market issue. We all know the markets are a little bit stagnant right now. Sure, it's great. Part of the project, part of the goal is to get the transit system in place, but then the subsequent part is to get the development that goes with that transit system. What are we doing to really, public sector can't fund all that. That has to be done as a private sector venture. Are there initiatives at work to really, as you said, have the developers there lined up when the station is finally open?
Well, the one I mentioned is underway in the city of Orlando, so I can speak for the four stations in the city of Orlando, which are Florida Hospital, Link Central Station, Church Street Station, and OH down at Sly. And every one of those areas have people or have plans in place and are ready to go. There's a developer that owns Church Street Station that has plans for a hotel. Obviously, that's based on the Amway Center being completed. We will get responses to a solicitation we did related to the Creative Village. I think they're due either today or tomorrow, so we're moving forward there. Florida Hospital has incredible plans on their campus and are ready to continue making investment, so all in the city of Orlando. And one other thing, and I'm going to have to step out to go demolish a fire station, but Linda touched on it earlier, but to make the transit-oriented development work, we need to make the commuter rail work. And to do that, you have to be able to get off at a station and get somewhere. And the primary destinations, I think, or origins are going to be in downtown Orlando. So you have to be able to get off at one of the 4 stations I talked about and then get to work or get to the Performing Arts Center or get somewhere. So we are going to expand the limo system from hospital to hospital in Thornton Park to the Citrus Bowl and everything in between, so that you can get off at any of those 4 stations and get somewhere quickly and for free, more importantly, or just as importantly. And then Linda is exactly right. Eventually, the vision is to have it expanded out to Baldwin Park and through College Park, so that you have a very large area that you could travel from Sanford or Winter Park and then be able to reach conveniently.
Two things just to follow the mayor there is the part of our public involvement is also to reach out to these origin destinations and those places of business, and even beyond the bus system is to look at and educate them on the incentives that are around transit type of systems. There's tax incentives to employers as well as employees for using transit, and to educate them about that, and potentially even setting up shuttle services or carpools or car sharing, etc. So folks that may say they don't want to take the bus, they have other modes of being able to get from the train station to their point of destination. Another point to make on this subject is what FDOT is doing in working with the Rail Commission and acquiring the station areas is that obviously we're going to be acquiring where there's parking area, obviously enough parking to support the initial ridership there, as well as the long-term goal is to turn those stations back over to the local governments with full development rights on those parking areas, as long as they maintain the parking needed for commuter rail. So essentially you look at that parking potentially going vertical or something like that, so that it can fully support that development around there. There's no constraints other than just make sure we got parking for the rail.
Just real quickly, this is a country that loves instant gratification, and during the debate I told opponents and supporters alike that don't judge this system on what it does the first 5 or 10 years. This community is going to grow up around this system.
Also, James, I'd like folks to think a little broader about transit-oriented development, since that's been a big topic of today's seminar, than just the site. When some people talk transit-oriented development, it's the exact station site. And I'd like you to think a little beyond that. There are opportunities at each of these sites, but there's also the catchment area around the site, and we've all talked to some examples along those lines. But something that hasn't surfaced yet today that I'd like people to consider as you become more familiar with these projects and look around at the opportunities is also corridor development tied into these stations. So it's the site, it's the catchment area, and it's also the corridor. And I'll use the Sanford station again as an example. Now, if a few folks that we had spoken to who had been raised in Sanford didn't know where the Sanford station was, I'm not sure everybody in this room today knows where the Sanford station is going to be. But okay, someone does. But if you go north or east on I-4 and head east on 46 near the Seminole Town Plaza as if you're going into downtown Sanford, you come up to a bridge where you're crossing over the railroad tracks, and you will see the auto train station on your right. You will see a Progress Energy substation on your left, and behind that is where the Sanford station is going to be. There is nothing at all around there, not even a sidewalk. It's complete empty canvas. Extraordinary opportunity at the site. Extraordinary opportunities in the catchment area. The whole south side of 46 is vacant land waiting to be developed. But you've also got a distance of about a mile. I'm looking at Brian Kanan. He's done some really good work for us on some of these corridors. About a mile, Brian, probably to downtown Sanford. And downtown Sanford has all the character that people say they're looking for in a community. But it hasn't really taken off yet. So we're looking at that corridor as presenting extraordinary opportunities, perhaps with the help of an additional transportation investment we're looking at either streetcar or bus rapid transit. We've got a lot of corridors that we're studying jointly with Lynx. But think of that opportunity there to link the Sunrail station with downtown Sanford and an opportunity to completely redevelop that corridor. Those opportunities exist throughout Central Florida. And James, I consider that transit-oriented development as well.
One more thing on TOD. We've all seen examples, great location, lots of passengers, lots of service, and then the final built result is not that good. Are there guidelines in place? I mean, DOT is controlling the sites. Will you be working with the developers to ensure that there are best practices, that we're actually designing stations that are really not just good development projects, but are great places? Because that seems to be, you know, part of the subject as well. Because in the end, as commuters, we get off the train, we want to be in a great place. We don't want to be looking at the back of a parking garage, or we don't want to be, you know, having to walk across sets of tracks in order to get, you know, there are examples in the country, successful systems, not very good urban places. So are there guidelines in place to try to ensure?
Well, I know we have adopted a transit-oriented development plan as part of our comp plan. And you're exactly right. You get one bite at the apple, and I think it's more far-reaching than any of our other plans. And we're encouraging developers to make sure that it looks good and it works good. And here again, I think Orange County will use more the carrot than the stick. We want to make sure that the first ones out of the box work, and then I think everything will fall into place after that. So you're exactly correct. You don't want the first ones to be ill-conceived.
Exactly.
The department's involvement is basically in supporting the local governments as much as possible to make this a successful project. We're going out front and acquiring the corridor and building the project and not putting limitations on it as such so that the proper development cannot occur. And our role mainly is in support of the Commuter Rail Commission in making that happen, because eventually this is the commission's and the local government's commuter service.
We're actually a little bit behind schedule, 3 minutes, but I want to ask each of the four speakers. I'm in Tampa. We have a referendum coming up. So for us, the decision has not been made. You've made the decision. The decision for us has not been made. And a lot of times, you'll talk to somebody who's not, typically would not be in this room, and what you get is some variation of the question, what's in it for me? Why should I care? 15 seconds, what would you say to that person?
I think that this sort of a rail system is the future of Orange County. Even though you live to the east or the west, you will eventually get some sort of a spur, and a system has to begin someplace.
Great. Harry?
I agree. And for those of you who have lived elsewhere, it's not unusual that there's this debate. Do we need something like this or not? Well, we've gone a little beyond that, except for some communities, like the one in which I live in, Winter Park. But I think we're beyond that as a region. We know we need this. But what you find elsewhere in the country, the debate ends about do we need it when the first phase opens. And then the debate shifts to when am I getting mine? And that's an important part of what we do at MetroPlan Orlando. So what's in it for me, for people who are not going to be direct beneficiaries of either Sunrail or high-speed rail right now? We tell them this is the first piece of something larger. This is the first component of a larger regional rail transit system. In fact, our board, under Commissioner Segal's leadership, has already approved the next 2 rail projects. And many of you know the timeline associated with these things. It takes a long time to go from drawing board to reality. So the next 2 rail transit projects, components of our regional vision plan, will be heading from the Orange County Convention Center east to the interface with Sand Lake Road. Again, that's going to be that'll be an interface between Sunrail and another rail project, so wow, that's going to be another home run right there. Further east to the airport, and then further east to Innovation Way, and southeast to Medical City, Lake Nona. We had a request at our last board meeting from Osceola County to consider an extension even further southeast, just across the Osceola County line, for some exciting development opportunities that they see there. The other rail project is in the 441 corridor, actually beginning just a few blocks from here, where the Florida Central Railroad comes just beneath I-4. If you see that at Robinson, that track commotion underneath, that's the Florida Central Railroad, where it comes into downtown Orlando. operating pretty much out the 441 corridor to Lake County, and that's in a partnership with the Lake Sumter MPO. TJ Fish is here with us today. That is important for us, and it is important for the Lake Sumter MPO. So those will be the next 2 rail transit projects to deliver on that larger regional transit vision.
Great, thank you. Todd.
Harry took my 15 seconds. No, I'm just kidding. No, I will go back to one thing that you had said in the beginning, and it goes back to even my experience as a college student as well, is options. This provides people more options. And when you go to the store, what do you want? You want options. You want to be able to price shop and whatnot. This allows another option for people to have. You know, and I too, and you think of New York, the subway system in New York City. Well, I went to school in Western New York and grew up in Central New York. I took the Amtrak train into downtown Buffalo, took their subway system out to the suburb for there, walked to my apartment, and then between the campuses, and what I needed to do for school was bus. And so, I mean, you know, and even then I didn't really know what I was into and what my eventual career would turn me, you know, where it lead me to now. But I had that option. My parents had that option, be able to get me to school. I could go to school there. I didn't have to go locally. You know, I too did not own a vehicle until, I don't think I owned a vehicle until I was a senior in college. But, you know, we had that option. It was available. Those options will be available for Central Florida in the future with these systems in place.
Well, I could sum it up in 2 words, quality of life. I guess it's 3 words. But let me add one other thing. We're on the verge of a tremendous opportunity here with this senior tsunami that's coming at us. The baby boomers and the senior population is going to almost double in just a few years. We have the Generation Y, the ones that sleep with their iPhones, who love sustainability and environmental issues and love transit, the options of transit. So I think those things alone say we better be ready, we better be prepared, because every other community the size of ours in this country is moving in that direction, and we don't want to be left behind. We want to continue to be this beautiful place that people want to move to and live in.